Let's move on to some audience questions, Mary Lou. The first comes from Shane McGuinness. We're into the world of Brexit. We've avoided it up till now. Shane McGuinness asks, if the Northern Ireland Protocol in the withdrawal agreement is implemented by Westminster, do you think that the island of Ireland is a step closer to economic unity? And if so, what active steps are Sinn Féin taking in order to achieve economic unity? So that's from Shane.
Okay, well, hello, Shane. The purpose of the protocol is to protect the All-Ireland economy and to ensure that we can keep the lights on the island. Even with the protocol, Shane, Brexit is bad news, and Brexit will be destabilising economically for the island of Ireland, for Britain itself, in my view, and for the continent as a whole. So there's no magic wand that can be produced to make that go away. We are in a difficult place. It does mean that for the purposes of the North, that it will stay within the single market for different purposes, but within a shared or a different customs union. So it's kind of a messy, it's an inelegant mechanism.
It might be inelegant, Mary Lou. I suppose part of Shane's question, though, is it optimal in some ways, or are you using that, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way, to move closer to economic unity and a united Ireland?
Well, I think, and I don't take that as a pejorative. I mean, my stated position, my work every day, Thomas, is about reunification, and it's about democracy in Ireland. So yes, of course, we're working for those things. But I would have to say that in the first instance, the protocol is a mechanism just to stabilise, and to protect the island as a whole in what are very, very difficult circumstances. Yeah. Does this advance the issue of economic unity? Shane has asked. Well, you might well reflect on the fact that Brexit has ignited the debate around reunification generally, not just economically, but across the whole range of issues. And I think undoubtedly, people who may not have particularly cared or may not have had a very strong view on the issue of the partition of the island now are in a situation where they're asking themselves and asking other people questions. But the economic dynamic on the island, bear in mind, 20 years ago and more, business in Ireland, the CBI in the north, IBEC in the south, and small business across the island have in many ways been ahead of the curve. They have always seen the benefit of an all-Ireland approach and economies of scale of that nature.
Perhaps, Mary Lou, but yet they might have, as you say, put forward the strengths of that. That leads us quite nicely into another question on the topic of Brexit. Do you hear Sinn Féin hasn't that any changes to the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland would breach the Good Friday Agreement, suggesting that this rules out the option entirely. Is Mary Lou also fighting to ensure that there is no change to infrastructure across the Irish Sea, considering that a border within the UK would equally breach the consent principle? Question there.
Yeah, and these matters of borders have been debated up and down. I mean, the primary concern for me is no hardening of the border on the island of Ireland, and people who are old enough to remember will remember the time when border crossings were closed. People will also reflect on the fact that one of the big symbolic moments and symbolic evidence of the strength of the peace process was when those border roads were opened. And the fact
it's worth saying, though, Mary Lou, is it not, that many of the reasons that the border was shut weren't down to customs checks, they were police checkpoints?
Yes, that's correct. And army, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not entirely, is it slightly disingenuous to say that that it would be economic concerns that would bring you back to the situation that you've described, where there were army posts across the Irish border? There's a distinction there to be made, isn't there?
Well, of course there is. I mean, there's no armed checkpoints on the island, or should there, or will there ever be again? But I'm making a slightly different point, Thomas. I'm saying that the progress of peace was manifest when the border roads were opened, and the fact that people now move seamlessly north to south. And the reality is that people live their lives across the two jurisdictions, and we need to protect that. I mean, a lot of the foundation for the success of the peace process was not least because Ireland and Britain were both members of the European Community and then the European Union. So that facilitated, the four freedoms and a lot of that movement across the two islands and across the island itself. And there is a real concern that there would be a hardening of the border, and that in turn would disrupt matters, cause difficulties for business, for agriculture, and for people going about their daily lives.
Let me ask about business, if you don't mind, Mary Lou. I think earlier this week, Michelle O'Neill and Arlene Foster sent a joint letter to the EU Commission asking that they would look into ways in which the Northern Ireland Protocol could be interpreted in such a way that businesses could still export the goods that they need to from the UK into Northern Ireland. I wonder what, I mean, some people were commenting that was an interesting thing for Sinn Féin to be asking, because on one hand they're saying that they want to see no infrastructure on the border between the Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, but then also going to the EU and saying, well, hold on, we don't want to have the rules here between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK that are required under EU law as well. Is there a hypocrisy in there at all, Mary?
No, there isn't, Thomas. And bear in mind, you might have added to the list of things we didn't want. We didn't want Brexit, just to say that here. Yeah. But hey, here we are. The issue at hand was there was a lot of talk about food chain and food supplies and supermarkets, and there was a real concern that there would not be disruption to those supply chains. That was at the core of the concern. And just so as we're clear, there was a concern that some 55,000 jobs might be jeopardized or undermined if difficulties were to emerge in the supply chain. So the protocol has to be delivered. That is a matter that has been agreed and concluded. And I think what is in question now is not moving from or permanent derogations, but certainly a grace period to make sure that we don't walk into some kind of shock situation in respect of food supply. Okay. So I think it was, and indeed, you used the term hypocrisy, I would use the term pragmatism, and caring for the fact that Brexit is bad news all around. And I don't want to see one single person, if I could avoid anybody losing their job or their livelihood as a result of it. We'll do what we need to do to secure people's welfare.
Absolutely. Let me ask a question, Mary Lou, from Emma, has been sent in as well. On a similar theme, she asks, Sinn Féin has always been a Eurosceptic party. You were opposed to EU membership in 1973, opposed to Maastricht Treaty, Treaty of Nice, Lisbon Treaty, every EU expansion in between. Mary Lou, she says, has even debated with Nigel Farage against EU expansion. Is Sinn Féin still Eurosceptic, or did the fact that the DUP supported Brexit change all of that? I think that's a valid question.
Oh, of course, all of the questions, Thomas, are valid.
Yes, certainly.
So no, we're not. Actually, Euroscepticism is a particularly English phenomenon. Elsewhere in the continent and across the European Union, the term that's used is Eurocritical, not Eurosceptic. We're not, little Irelanders. We're not small, insular thinkers. Our issue with the European project is not around whether or not we are European. We clearly are. I mean, Ireland is an ancient European nation. We are very much European, but the issue at question is...
Why then, Mary Lou, sorry, were you opposed to EU membership in the first place?
I was going on to tell you. Well, I wasn't. I was a bit at that time. But the issue is the direction of the European project itself. And that is a matter of contention, and we would be critical of the fact that the project lost sight of kind of the essential social element, a social Europe, I suppose, as against a Europe that's very much designed in which the markets are, all dominating, where competition policy is the centerpiece and the central dynamic, and where the interests of corporates and elites are served, and where so many people got left behind. And by the way, Thomas, it's interesting to reflect on Brexit Britain and to look to different parts on the island of Britain and to ask, why did communities, strong working class communities, come out and vote for Brexit? And some people put it down to just, well, it was kind of chauvinism or even racism, and there's no doubt there was ugly politics at play. But you also have to be honest and say that for many of those workers and those communities, they felt not unreasonably that they had been completely forgotten and left behind, and they didn't feel the benefits of social solidarity and progress that the European project ought to have provided to them, but failed to do so. So that doesn't make you, by the way, Thomas, that analysis does not make you a Eurosceptic or a bad European. I think it makes you the best kind of European, a European who actually believes in European citizens and their rights, and who's prepared to stand up.
Mary Lou, would it be fair to say that your party or you are opposed to further EU expansion, things like tax harmonisation? Would that be something that you wouldn't be comfortable with?
Absolutely not. Because for societies to work in the best interests of their people, we have to be sure that core democratic functions like the raising of taxes and core decisions around the expending of public monies are taken within the member state in question. I think
it's just, Mary Lou, that what you've just said there resonates and has ever so slight echoes in it of the kind of the Brexiteer arguments of reclaiming sovereignty, and laws need to be made in Westminster and not in Brussels. Would it be fair to say that there is an overlap of significant size when it comes to your thinking on the European Union between you and your party and the Brexiteer project?
No, absolutely not. I mean, the Brexiteer project is about Tories coming in, playing on people's fears and getting a free hand so that they can run down environmental standards, run down workers' rights. I mean, the Tory Brexit project was never about the liberation of working people or about progress in terms of, these core generational issues. I remember at the time when, there was a huge kerfuffle by the Tories in Britain around something as subversive and obnoxious to their minds as the Working Time Directive. An instrument simply to make sure that working people work decent hours and that their health and their safety is protected was considered to be some, atrocious affront to civilized and democratic life. So that's how the Tories are. And to anybody who thought that really this was about, really about any higher ideal, I would say to you, watch that space and you'll see in time what plans Tory Britain has in terms of further privatisation, ravaging of, because you're living with the circumstances of some of the consequences of some of that in the north already, Thomas.